best friend. He's still a very good friend. We've been friends for like 2 years, and then one day he introduced me to someone and totally mispronounced my name, and I was like, how can we be so close and you have no idea how to pronounce my last name? But it happens.
It's like a Seinfeld episode. It's like dating someone and you don't know their first name for like the first two
Yeah,
months.
I mean that happens a lot, where you're like, I'm not quite sure I know your
uh,
last name, but
uh, yeah, I mean, especially with dating. I mean, I live in San Francisco. I feel like everyone here has the same first name, anyways. But
how's San Francisco doing?
I'm wearing a hat, a hoodie. I'm wearing no.
Yeah.
It's never been this cold. I've been here. I'm from New York originally, but
Oh
I
yeah.
this is never. It's 10 years. It's never been like this.
Wow. I mean, is there an end in sight, or is it just going to continue on and be like a wintry spring?
It's California. I mean, there's the end's always in sight.
Right.
It's so I heard you say Ohio. Are you from there originally?
Yes, I'm originally from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
And then I came to New York for college. So, I have you ever been to Cincinnati?
I've been to Cleveland, I've been to Akron, and I've been to Columbus, but I've never been to
Oh
Cincinnati.
wow. You're
Mhm.
making your way down. Soon you'll get to Cincinnati. What were you doing in Akron?
I've been touring in bands. I mean, I toured in bands
Ah,
for 10 plus years. Akron, Ohio would have been, I don't think we played a show there. I remember going to a rib joint, like a barbecue joint,
ah.
and it was set up like a 7-Eleven with the lady behind like glass and stuff like
All right. That sounds right for
Yeah,
Akron.
yeah. Akron was and then we went to the public library to use the free Wi-Fi, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Well, there's great free Wi-Fi at the libraries in Cincinnati, and there's probably a ribs joint too.
I'd
So
imagine so.
no
Yeah.
excuses.
All right. So were you writing those first words you ever wrote in Cincinnati, or did you wait till New York?
Oh, I was a prolific writer when I was about 8 or 9, writing tons of short stories, and also like some very inspiring stories about how I remember I wrote a really bad story about how a mixed breed cocker spaniel ends up winning the Westminster Kennel Club dog show just by charm. Which actually works. That's sort of like a con artist story now that I think about it. It wasn't, I didn't frame it that way at age 8, but no, I was always wanted to be a writer or a private detective. And so I was constantly writing stories in my bedroom in Cincinnati as a little kid.
A
Um,
private detective at 8 years old?
yes, I was obsessed with Agatha Christie and anything murder mystery at 8 years old, and wanted desperately to be a private investigator,
Mhm.
like a Remington Steele type private investigator.
I was gonna say Inspector Gadget, but I guess we're off on a little.
Oh right, yeah. I mean, I loved Inspector Gadget, but
Uh-huh.
I was really dreaming myself into like a fantasy adulthood.
Yeah.
Uh, you know,
What was life like growing up? I mean, how old are you?
how old am I now?
Yeah.
I am 47 now.
Okay,
So I was born in 1975, and most of my memories of that are of childhood are sort of 80s based.
totally, totally. So were you a fan of Stranger Things?
Yeah, I watched the first 2 episodes. I mean, seasons, and I loved it. I kind of didn't fall out with it. I just sort of
Yeah.
drifted away. I should go back to it, but obviously, it really like conjured memories of suburbia, Midwestern suburbia for me in
Big
such a
time.
great way.
Big time. So you grew up in Cincinnati. You're writing, your I guess version of Agatha Christie short stories. Uh,
Right.
I'm assuming you go through high school, things like that. How quickly did you end up in New York City? Were you an 18-year-old kid when you showed up in New York?
I went to like an all boys Jesuit high school, which I did not love. And and still to this day they're like their magazine, alumni magazine, keeps finding me. I feel like I have to keep moving until they always find you. Um so I went to college at Columbia
Uh,
here in New York. And so I just showed up. I remember my dad drove me in a van. Um all the way through Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and just dropped me in New York City and Manhattan and drove away, and there I was. So it's been, and then I was like instantly in love with it, you know. I was obsessed with New York. First, I was obsessed with New York as a child too. When I wasn't obsessing about being a private investigator or a writer, I had a lot of fantasies about, you know, Warhol life and like the factory and that whole very cool New York
Mhm.
world in Ohio. I mean, Ohio's a great place to dream about other places, right? I mean, it's like you, no end to that. So yeah, I actually wasn't 18. I transferred to Columbia, so I had spent a year at another college before I transferred
Mhm.
in Tennessee.
This would be what, the second half of the 90s?
I came here in 1996.
Mhm.
So yeah, and so that was, I mean, that was a great time to be in New York, I have to say. I think probably anyone who first arrives in New York at any age, I mean, at any time, if they're young, it's a great time to be in New York. But I found that the mid 90s were just like, it was awesome because it was just still so wild and hedonistic and untamed. And there were just so, there were sections of Manhattan that felt completely different from each other. And some were really dangerous. Most were so exciting. They all had so much personality of their own, and it was also so much cheaper.
Mhm.
So I mean, it was a very different city then to the 21st century city, um, and I loved it. I loved it so much.
It was when Alphabet City was actually like a Velvet Underground song.
It absolutely, and I remember you could go when I in 1996. You could go to Avenue A, but if you went beyond Avenue A, you were taking your life in your hands.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It was so dangerous. And actually, I have a theory that what changed it all was the advent of cash machines. Because as soon as they started putting cash machines on First Avenue, that was almost like the gentrifier that like kept moving everything.
There's literally
Uh,
money here. Please come.
yes,
Give it to you out of
literally,
the
they like
machine.
planted money on corners, and so people would like gravitate toward it. So, but yeah, I remember like, you know, it was just like if you went to Avenue C, it was just like a total. You never knew what was going to happen there, you know, and that
Yeah,
was so exciting.
I mean, you did. You just get some drugs, but yeah, no,
Right.
or
It
get
was a great
stabbed.
place to get
Um,
drugs,
yeah,
but
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. So, if you could put yourself back in that time, were you working on that first book back then, or was it some time until you would really kind of get going in that?
You know what? I really wanted to be a writer. I was an English major. I loved writing, but I did not, and I wanted, you know, I wanted to be. I think most people who love books want to be a writer when they're young. They sort of see it as a, and that just means they want to be around books. You know, you can either end up an editor or work in a library or sorry about this.
That's okay.
Um, but I I took some writing classes in college, and I thought of myself as a poet at that point. So I wrote a lot of really bad poetry and a few good ones. I actually found a few lately. I was like, they're not that bad. But then after I graduated from school, I didn't write. I didn't write fiction at all until I was about 30. So
Wow.
I took my 20s off just to sort of live. And I mean, I was writing a lot. I was writing a lot as a journalist and working at magazines and that whole thing. But it took me a while to get back to it. I sort of had lost my. I don't think I lost my faith in my writing, but I just became distracted with being in my 20s in New York and that whole thing. So um,
What magazines were you working for at the time?
I went to so after I graduated from college, I spent half a year in Venice as at the Peggy as an intern at the Peggy Guggenheim, which was great and changed my life. And then I came back and I worked a lot. I wrote a lot for art magazines like Art Forum. I my first magazine job was at Time Out New York in the late 90s, which was a really great way to learn about magazines because it was a weekly and it was just so intense. Like the turnover so you had to write so quickly and work so fast, and it really taught me so much. And then I worked at a magazine called V as part of Visionaire for a while, and then eventually I ended up becoming the editor in chief of Interview magazine, which I went to in 2008. And then I realized about 2 years in that I was not meant to be the captain of any ship, except for that other people were on. And so I've since been like the editor at large, and I'm a contributor at Vanity Fair, and I still write for the Times and a bunch of places. But that was sort of when I shifted in. I've decided that what I really wanted to do is pursue my own writing and write fiction, and not really work uh, a top job as in a magazine. And I had no interest because I had very little ambition in that way. I didn't
So
really care about the wielding of power and culturally at all. So
were you around some, I mean, okay, this is a different time. I'm not sure how magazines really work now, but I mean, Time Out probably back then was a huge deal.
it was
Um,
great.
yeah, no, I can only imagine you probably, having your pulse in the city in that way, but also thinking about it now, you're still around words, right? During this time,
Yeah,
looking at words, or they might not be in a novel or a book, but they're in your head, right? I mean, that must have helped in some fashion.
absolutely. I feel like I got to interview so many great people in as part of those jobs at V and interview especially. And just talk to so many writers who are older, like, Norman Mailer
Oh,
and
wow.
Joan Didion and Toni Morrison and Gore Vidal, and just so many exceptional writers. And it was almost like my own grad school program, just like talking, really studying these writers and then getting a chance to talk to them one on one. So certainly, and I was always sort of plotting in my head during my 20s. I was just too wild and going out too much to like actually sit down and do the work. And as we all know, as we write, like, writing is such a lonely, sedentary job in so many ways. And so eventually, if you really want to be a writer, you're just going to have to like stay in, accept the loneliness or
Party
the
by yourself.
aloneness.
Oh.
Yeah, and exactly. And so that eventually happened, which was needed. But yes, words were always part of my life, even this journalistic activity of my 20s and early 30s was still front and center for sure. The funny thing is when I went to write my first novel, so many people said you should write like about being young in New York now. There's no novel for this generation like that. And I was going out very late, and I was a real social. It's amazing because I'm so asocial now, but I was extremely social in my 20s. And I was like, no, that's too expected. Like, that's exactly the novel people would expect me to write. And I wanted to like prove myself, right? And I wrote a totally different kind of novel, and proud of that novel. But I wish to death I had written that 20s novel in New
Really?
York. Oh, I think it would have been so fun, and I think I would have gotten it so right. Now I couldn't write about being super young in New York. I have no idea.
Sure.
I, I think it was a missed opportunity to write about the early 2000s and what was happening there. But yeah,
Yeah,
you
well,
write what you can. You write the stories that appeal to you at the time, and the magnets that you're drawn to. Like you can go. Someone else should have written it, I guess, but no one really did.
yeah, I mean, I guess you can't really beat yourself up over that, but at the same time, it's like I feel, with culture, it always circles back. So I feel like now we're entering a 90s phase where everything
I
from the
know.
fashion, music, you know, pop punk bands are coming back. It's all kind of circling back around. And I find it interesting when writers write period pieces from not that long ago. So you're talking
Right.
about writing a piece, in the early 2000s, which in our minds is like yesterday. But
Yeah,
for some
totally.
TV who, who's 18 now and was born in what, 2005 or something like that. Um,
When people, I don't know how old you are, but when people cross the birth date threshold of like the 21st century, I feel really crazy.
I'm 35, so I'll put you at age.
Okay,
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I guess at that time, what Sex in the City would have been on TV. I didn't really know what New York
that's
stuff would have
right.
been happening. That would have
But
been
I mean, but my New York would have been the opposite of Sex and the
exactly
City, which was ruining New York, I felt at the
yeah.
time. Because I
Kind of
was
like
living,
a Bret
at that
Easton
time, I was
Ellis
living
kind of.
right, really are also not great, but like American Psycho is like Sex and the City in a way. It's not really about like, a cooler class of people. But I was living in right below the meatpacking district in the West Village, and during Sex in the City, I mean, it just became like infiltrated with 50-year-old women from New Jersey in
My
high
mother.
heels trying to mimic those people. I mean, now I'm about to turn 50, so who am I to talk? But and you know what's so weird about that show is like I remember watching it and just hating it and being like, this is not New York. This is exactly what's wrong with New York. It's a horrible show. Like a year ago, I was at the gym on a treadmill, which shows how much I've changed. And I that like a first season episode of that show came on, and I was watching it, and I was like, "This is such a good show, really showing like such a cool side of New York." And it
Yeah,
just goes to show that like New York has changed so much that now that New York does seem really amazing.
big time, big time.
You
Didn't have
know,
cell
so
phones or catching cabs. Yeah, no, it was a different time.
I know it's so funny.
Yeah, so that first book, was that a struggle to get that published? Was it published in a traditional sense?
It was a struggle to get published. Actually, yes, it was a struggle to get published. It was a struggle to write because I didn't know how to write a novel. You don't know how to write a novel until you write a novel. And I spent 5 years writing it. Sometimes I thought I was only doing it to allow myself to chain smoke because that's back when I smoked. So it just like gave me a wonderful excuse to sit in a room and just smoke Marlboro Lights indefinitely. I know. Switch from Camel Lights, but I yeah. So and then I took 5 years, and I had it suffers, I think, from first novel syndrome. I call it, which is like you think the world's ending, and you think you only have one novel that you'll write, and you need to put every idea you've ever had into it, like just everything needs to go into one novel. So it was like very bloated and big and had a lot of ideas, big and small, all over the place. And it was eventually published by a small press called Counterpoint, and they did a great job and edited it down. And it's a weird novel, but it taught me so much about writing. You had to go through that process of figuring out how you're going to write a book, and also you're still sort of struggling to find your voice, and it's a little magical realist. And I realized one of the many things I realized from writing that book is that I really should not be writing magical realist books. But yeah, it was an education.
Mhm.
uh but I also think that, like, my advice always for writers is you don't have to swallow the whole world. Like, you can have a smaller frame and do so much with it. And it doesn't have to be about, like, life and what is America, and it just, I mean, those big ideas that we want to shove in.
It doesn't have to be American pastoral. I mean, he started with Goodbye Columbus, so we can,
Right, right. But
no,
even American Pastoral has a smaller frame to it, than I think I was. I think I was trying to do like a mailer or something, like something giant. And talk about someone who's really fallen out of favor.
I think the Executioner song might be above my head.
Ah,
Oh, there it is, right there. Yeah, most
one
definitely
of my favorite books of
one of the
all
best books
time.
ever written, without a doubt.
Especially the first half of it is the most beautiful thing in the world. The
Mhm.
simplicity and the way he gets the characters and doesn't have to justify them is just like it's so good.
For
It's
anyone
amazing.
listening, yeah, for anyone listening to this at this exact moment in time, if you're watching any of the Netflix stuff, any of the Murdow murder stuff, this was like the first one. I mean, this was
Totally,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Brutal stuff.
Such a it's so brutal, and there's something just even just from the characters, he gets the whole landscape in.
Yeah.
It's breathtaking. You make me want to reread the first chapter again.
Is it on your bookshelf behind you?
Oh yeah, I am
Okay, good, good. All right,
sure.
all right. All right.
Like a minute, I'm sure I can find it.
Well,
So,
sometimes I'll do the podcast and the author will pop up and the bookshelf behind them is one of those like perfectly, everything's red, everything's blue, everything's
oh right,
so I'm happy not to see that.
and I have no order to this.
That's
And then
crazy.
sometimes, it's like just the other day, I was like, I guess I lost that book.
Yeah,
And then I ordered a new one, and then I was like laying down reading, and I look over, and I was like, "Oh, there it is!"
there
Like,
it is.
I it's so hard to find everything.
Yeah,
But wait, I am determined to find.
it'll happen.
Okay, it's
So
here
that so
somewhere. I promise you.
that first book comes out. I don't know if you're expecting to, be the next John Updike. I'm assuming that didn't happen. How do
That
you
did
feel?
not. That did not
How do you
happen.
feel going forward now into that second novel? Were you still at the magazine at that time? Were you working full time?
Yeah, I was working full time. I'm still working full time, really, in a way. But I 2011 at a small press. I mean, I think it sold out its advance, but it was obviously not a bestseller. And my agent, who is also a dear friend of mine, Bill Clegg, he said that he gave me the best advice early on, and he said you should always start the next book before the book the previous book comes out, because uh if it's a success, you'll feel nervous to start the next book because you'll feel like you have to match the success, and if it's a failure, you'll feel so disappointed you won't want to start again. And just to have something else going is so good because you already have something to go back to, and that's what I had done. And in retrospect, I mean, God, I had so much more confidence then than I do now in a way, because in retrospect, I just assumed the next book would be published and it would be great. Now I never think that, but I started writing Orient, which was the next book that came out, and that was, I mean, written on spec too. I never had like a deal. I was just sort of writing and hoping and following sort of my instinct to write a murder mystery. That was the first book wasn't a murder mystery, although there's a murder in it. But the second book is really a murder mystery, full stop, like a whodunit.
And for people who might not know, when you say you're writing on spec, that would mean that you're writing something in the hopes that something might happen with it. You have no deal.
Absolutely. That means there's like no contract, there's no like a promise to publish, there's no uh little purse money to write on. You're just writing a book. And for fiction, you often have to sell, unless you were a success with your first book, you often have to sell the book upon completion. You have to have a draft completed. Nonfiction, you can sometimes just turn in a few chapters and they get the tenor. But and so I just kind of went at it all over again. And that was great. And Harper took that up, and there was a lot of interest in that book. And so that was wonderful to see. It was called Orient, and it came out in 2015. It was set uh on Orient, which is on the North Fork of Long Island,
Well, it seems
which like New York City, from when I came to now, from when I wrote that book to now, Orient is a very different place too. It's changed a lot. So
well, I mean, looking through your bibliography, it seems like these books you have specific. You're very location based.
yes,
Does
I'm
that help
obsessed with
you?
location.
Okay, great. Does that help you get comfortable writing settings? Is it easier going into it knowing that it's all going to take place maybe in one location? Is that easier as a writer for you, or is it just kind of
Yeah, no, well, if I mean, I feel like I think there are some writers who can write about, it's all about characters, and you can put those characters anywhere. They could be floating in a spaceship or in a garden in London. but I feel like so much of my books, the plots and what, everything comes from the particular locations. And I sort of pride myself on that because I do a lot of research about them. I visit them, I go. I mean, there are writers too who like can write about a foreign city just by watching a bunch of YouTube clips, but I could never do that because I really want to get the sight and sound and taste and smells, and the politics of the places. Um, yeah, I mean, and that's just such to me, that's just such a wonderful motor for the plot is what's happening in the world around these characters too, and why they're there. So yeah, I think of the character. I mean, I think of the location as sort of the main character of the
Mhm.
book. One of the key protagonists or antagonists of the book.
And
Um,
just to go back to what you said about your agent telling you about to start the next book, you can even go even more micro with that, where anyone listening to this, if you're writing and you feel like you're getting stuck, oh, what I do is I always leave myself a trail for the next day. So if I'm
yes,
writing at night, I will even just once anything to lead you into the next thing is already a hurdle that you can jump to help with
it's
this.
so true. That's so helpful. You know what? Another thing that I did, because I was writing these really long books for a while. I've been sort of trying to shorten them a bit, but and I find like there was that. Do you remember that documentary? I wish I remembered the name of it. And it was about like a guy who was a climber, a hiker in a mountain, and he fell into a crevasse and was left for dead.
The
And
James Franco movie, right? He has to cut off his arm or his leg.
no, it was a different.
Oh,
It was a different one than the
oh.
arm cut off. This was a documentary.
Okay.
People, I guess, are falling into crevasses constantly, but this one, so he wasn't dead like his friend thought, and he crawled down the mountain to to be rescued to the very end. And he said, if I had ever thought that I had to crawl all the way down the mountain, I would have just given up. So I just made these like get to that tree or like get to that next rock or like so you set these like little goals. And I feel like the same is exactly true for writing a novel. You cannot think like I have to write this huge novel with all these characters. You just have to think like in a scene, like I just have to get to the end of this scene, like that's it. Don't even think ahead. Just write to the end of the scene and you're done for now. And then the next will come, you know? So it's you really do have to break it down and give yourself like small goals to get to. And as you said, that's always good. It's like for me too, like giving myself just a little diving board for the next day to jump off on.
So the second book comes out. I'm assuming, it did well for you, or how, I'm not sure if you
Yeah, it did
put
well. I mean,
pressure on yourself.
I felt it did well. Yeah, I thought it did well, and I thought it was it came out, and people really responded to it. It was uh well read, and so that was exciting, and that felt different than the first book just because it was a different kind of book too. And then and actually I had a two book deal for that, so that I had some assurance that another book was on its way, and so that was great and super exciting. And I wrote a novel set on a Greek island called The Destroyers, on Patmos, um, and which was very different than writing about America. It was this sort of a beautiful Greek island, um, which was also a mystery, and or maybe a bit more of a thriller. And that was great because then I would go there for 3 summers in a row and just sort of do research slash just swim in the Aegean all day, but on or like motorbike around the island. But it was great, and that was a lot of fun to write that book. And yeah, so I've been with Harper since, and keep writing these places, as you say, and it's been really nice.
Mhm. Had you been to Greece prior to writing that book, or was there any moment that kind of sprung that idea in your head to write about that specific island?
Yes, well, I had been to Greece before. I had been to Greece for a vacation when I was, I think it was like in 2003. It was the year before the Olympics, whatever
Hmm.
year that was, when the Olympics came back to Athens. But then the reason I wanted to write this novel is because it was set on Patmos, and I had always wanted to go to Patmos because I had heard in New York from sort of rich rich, glamorous friends, like, oh, you have to go to Patmos. It's like where we go every summer. It was like very fancy. And then, but I remembered Patmos from my Catholic school days being where the Book of Revelation was written. So I mean, I remember we would have in Catholic school, we would draw scenes from the Book of Revelation. I mean, how twisted! I was like a very like Catholic version of Dungeons and Dragons, but like drawing like the nude woman on the like on the bronco of the bull with chalices in her hands. And so that was where that's where John was exiled by Domitian to write and wrote what became the Book of Revelation. And so I loved this idea of like contemporary hedonism of its highest order on the same island that was like Christianity's idea of destruction in the end. And so I was just so attracted to those contrasting forces that I knew even before I went on vacation there that it was going to be a great location and then to write about. And I went for the one summer and it was so beautiful and I loved it. It was so weird and amazing. And so I just sort of built the story from there.
And you started writing
But
a book.
sometimes
Oh,
I was just gonna say, like, sometimes like I just feel like sometimes for me anyway, there's places that I gravitate to and I know there's a book in it. Like I just spent a month in Madrid over the holidays just to write. And I loved Madrid. I thought Madrid was so beautiful and the people were so warm and the art is so incredible, maybe one of the best art cities in the world. But for me, I don't think there was a novel there. And that doesn't mean I didn't love Madrid. I loved Madrid, but I didn't feel it. You know what I mean? Like I didn't feel like a novel.
I mean,
So I think,
yeah. well,
yeah,
wasn't Hemingway's first novel in Madrid? Was it?
Madrid.
I think it. Well, I think what's the name of the book? Why am I blanking?
I
But
don't
the
know, but
bull.
I've been reading a lot of Hemingway,
Yeah,
rereadings, a lot of
yeah, about the
Hemingway
bull
lately.
running in Madrid. The name escapes me. It's his.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. But so you went there for a whole month and felt no book was there.
the book was there. I didn't find the tensions. It wasn't tense. I need a tension. I need something wrong, or I need like a weird feeling about a place. Like it's in conflict somehow.
And are you good at?
Um,
Do you ever put roadblocks on yourself? Are you good at opening your mind and just allowing the process to happen, or do you ever deal with kind of the doubt in your head?
uh, I'm really good at like I'm so delusional. I think you have to be a writer that I just sort of like let myself go and I mean there's certain things that you worry about like am I portraying these people fairly. I mean, that's actually also the risk, of course, of foreign places. It's like you want the book to succeed and be exciting and interesting, but you don't want to sell everyone under the bus, like make cheapen a culture or
Totally.
offend anyone either. I mean, because that's not what the job is. I don't want to, portray a city that incorrectly.
Got it.
So there's always like questioning, in your head, like, is that right? Is that fair? Is that good? Is that what you want to write? But but at the same time, you just have to give yourself over to the story a little bit. It's a give and take.
How much time do you typically take between one book to the next? It seems like there's some space in between your publications.
Right. I mean, there shouldn't be because like I basically now have no life, and so all I do is write. So um and I start the next book before the other. So I this next novel comes out next week, and I already have written a very short novel, a horror novel, believe it or not. It's a small one set in Luxor, which is just down the Nile from Cairo. That's where the Valley of the Kings is. And but that was actually just meant to be a short story while I was waiting for my edits, but it sort of expanded and expanded. And then I'm about a third of the way through this Paris novel that I'm writing. So that's a weird extreme where I've already written a number of other things. But um I would say it takes me about a year to write the first draft of a book.
Mhm.
and then it takes another year to edit it and clean it up and rework it and make it right.
Mhm. Well, it sounds like you're doing kind of the Danielle Steele model. I talk about her a lot because she lives in San Francisco.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's got the biggest house in SF.
I used to know her daughters.
Oh, okay, cool. I mean, I feel like I've met them. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
but escapes me. But she's been known for she'll be working on 7 books at a time, and she almost draws it up as a circle where she's like, I'm writing this one, I'm editing this one, I'm copy editing this one, I'm notes for the, and she's constantly there's never a dull moment where she can kind of.
right.
So it sounds like you're able to meet if you wanted to do that, you could even expand more on that way of working. But it seems like you're already kind of doing that.
Right. Well, I am kind of doing that because I also still write journalism too. So I'm always like working on another thing, or there's another project going that's not fiction. Um, and so I do feel like there is a little bit of like so many different like projects at once. In fact, I think is that's easy to balance when you're younger. I mean, Danielle Steele, kudos to her for being able to like keep all of those plates spinning. But I like to do the writing. I could only do one at a time because I really devote myself to the character. Like and if I feel like I would break out of the character if I made another one. Um, I mean, I think it's like very performance based writing. And it's like you almost like embody the character to do the dialogue and but I would love that. And I'm always like envious of those people. I assume they must have assistants like running around holding the manuscripts or something. I have nothing.
Yeah.
I have nothing like that. So um
So
but do you ever run into Danielle Steele in San
uh,
Francisco?
no, I mean, no, I feel like she walks on rarefied air where it's just she kind of float. Her and Nancy Pelosi kind of just float above everyone else, and then
Right.
you can't really see them. No, but when I say she has this house, have you ever been to San Francisco?
I have. And it's
So
so beautiful.
love it. Yeah, up north near the Marina area, there's a one street Broadway. It's called Billionaires Row, and it's
Oh wow.
all they all live. And she has this house that I mean, it looks straight out of The Great Gatsby. It's covered with foliage that you can't actually see the house from any
Oh
angle.
wow.
I mean, it's sitting on a cliff. It's out of this
That's amazing.
literally out of a Gatsby novel. But no, I've never met her. But I think I met the daughters. But whatever.
Right. What
Yeah.
right do you have you met Dave or Vendela?
No, 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 no.
Eggers and Vendela Vita are there, and I'm trying to think of other SF writers
Oh
that
well, I
like
mean,
we
yeah, no, I'm good friends with Adam Johnson. He lives here.
uh-huh. Yeah.
Orphan Master's son. Who
Yeah,
else
for
is here?
sure.
Oh, Christopher Moore was on the podcast. He does all those comedic novels. You've seen him, Lamb,
Uh-huh.
stuff like that. He's an SF.
Uh-huh.
I who else? Oh, that's a great question. Oro Kwan lives here, but she's not
Oh,
been
I
on.
love her.
Yeah, but she hasn't been on the podcast yet. Um, uh, Armistead Maupin.
Oh
He's an.
yeah.
Oh yeah, no. So yeah, there's a whole list for sure. But
That's
I see
pretty
Adam
great.
Johnson because he lives 4 blocks away, and no one knows who he is except really for me. So he'll see me in the grocery store now, and he'll literally be like, "Oh fuck!" Like he's gonna like he's gonna talk to me again. But he's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. Yeah, it's been interesting. The doors the podcast is kind of open to, and people who want to talk to you. But enough about that.
Right.
Third book comes out. How much time leading up to where
Destroyers.
now? Yeah, because now is the fourth book that's coming out. And can you just tell everyone the name of it,
Oh,
please?
so Destroyers was my third book, and then I decided to write a fourth book set in Venice
Mhm.
called A Beautiful Crime,
Got it.
which was a bit kind of like a con artist book. And I had lived in Venice, as I told you, and so that was a city I'm sort of obsessed with and love, and always try to go back once a year ever since uh, I mean, I'll sleep. For many years I would just sleep on someone's floor. It wasn't like I was going and staying at the Daniele. It was like really just crashing. But I loved Venice so much. I always wanted to write about Venice, and so I just took the plunge and did that. And that came out in right before the pandemic, and I was so proud of that book. I'm still so proud of that book. Um, but then I had a plan to write about Cairo, and I had a really great, idea this for this book, this current book that's about to come out called The Lost American. And I had a whole idea of like I'll go in spring of 2020 and like really study Cairo. I'd been to Cairo before in 2010 before the Arab Spring, and really get to know it now. But then of course the pandemic happened, and I hibernated I had a little cabin in the Berkshires. So I escaped the city and stayed up there. And I was like, well, I can't write that book now. And then I thought, the world is ending. You can write whatever book you want. And so I just started anyway to write this book. And it was such a weird book for me. I think so often the next book I write is a reaction to the last book.
Mm.
It's almost like I did this, I want to do something so different. So Destroyers and A Beautiful Crime are very different books in so many ways, but they both deal with like centers of wealth and money and a moneyed class of people and leisure and these beautiful places that are, very touristy. And it was about wealth and privilege. And I didn't want to write that book because I'm not that kind of writer, only that kind of writer. It's so easy to fall into these little traps where like, oh, he writes about the 1%. But I wanted to write
Thomas
this.
Wolfe immediately came to my
Oh,
head.
exactly. Or like Jay McInerney, or you know what I mean? It's like a certain class of people. And I mean, it's ironic because if you saw where I grew up in Ohio, you'd be like, that's no, it was very nice. It was very middle class, So I wanted just to go a totally different direction and different lens on the world. And I chose Cairo for that reason, but also while, sort of, I also wanted to talk about what was happening with international arms sales, and the forces that are, and really the impetus was also this idea of, can a whole country be complicit in a murder? What does that mean to have a country be part of, to be a suspect in a murder, or a corporation? Um, and so I was just playing with those ideas, and this idea came up, to sort of investigate uh, what would happen. So the premise of the novel is a woman in her 30s is in New York City, sort of like at the end of her own rope in New York, being sort of like a party person, and a life that's sort of unraveling. It's I think it's what happens in your 30s in New York, and I don't know, maybe out in San Francisco, or maybe San Francisco's a bit nicer, but to people, but you kind of like one kind of one life ends, and you've aged out of it and you've matured out of it, and you haven't found the next one yet, and so that's what's happened to her. Her brother is an arms tech for a defense contractor in Massachusetts, and he is sent over to Egypt to help. Basically fixes the weapons that are sold by his company, and while there, he dies mysteriously. He falls from his hotel balcony, and it's instantly ruled a suicide. She doesn't believe that. Um, you're not quite sure whether she's crazy and not believing that. It's just a state of grief not to accept a suicide, which is often, what happens with a suicide is you don't want to believe that someone you love killed themselves. Or there really was something, there was foul play. And so she ends up going to Egypt to try to figure out what happened to her brother. And there she meets this young gay guy who is Egyptian, who sort of accidentally falls into helping her try to figure it out. Um, and so it just brought in like so many different exciting threads into a story for me that I was just really, really anxious to explore, and required a whole new round of research that I hadn't done before. For A Beautiful Crime, I did this research, to death on uh, colonial American silver. I mean, if you want to read a colonial American silver thriller, I wrote that book. but for this one, people were dying to read that. But I for this one, I was researching arms sales and arm agreements and also deaths and autopsies overseas, and obviously the contemporary history of Egypt, particularly under Sisi, um, post revolution. And so there was a lot to chew on there with all of those threads, very different from the last books.
And for a novel like that, do you outline?
No, I never outline, and I always make a promise. Like in the next book, I'm going to outline. Like I've got to start doing outlines. Like this is like you can't write like this
I mean, I
anymore.
talk to authors and they swear, and I'm the same way. I don't know what the next page is going to be. Uh,
Exactly, and
you know,
that's what's also so frightening. Is like you don't even know. Like, had I written this page the day before, the whole book would be so different.
but that's
Entirely
why
different
it's
book.
art.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, if Picasso went to a canvas knowing exactly how he was going to do it, it wouldn't be art. That's how I think of it as. But then I talk to authors, and from the first, they know the last sentence of that book before they even start the first sentence of the book, and that's the only way they can do it.
They
You
have
know?
a little idea of how it ends, and they're just going in that direction. I feel like I'm cursed because I do that, except people expect, somehow I've fallen into this uh position where people expect to have like a very satisfying plot. And so like I also like have to do some sort of like weird gymnastic where like I have to like solve something while getting to the end, which is,
Sure.
I mean, I read these novels and they're amazing, but it's like the author obviously felt no impetus to solve what happened. I was like, that's not fair. Like,
Yeah, I
why do
mean,
I always have to figure everything out?
yeah,
Uh,
I feel like books are the one. I've read books where the ending it made you not even want to read the book. like like you get to the end, you're like, really? Like that's it? You gave me
Absolutely.
350 pages of brilliancy and fucked it all up in the last 7 pages.
Absolutely. I actually think it's so hard to end a novel and of any sort. And so I would say more often than not, endings are disappointing.
Mhm, mhm.
Like, what's your favorite ending to a book? When is like an ending super successful?
Well, it would have been it would have been the ending of the last book of the series. So
Ah,
I'm a big John Updike guy.
right.
And the tetralogy Rabbit,
Yeah.
final book, Rabbit at Rest, where it's all said and done. The stories I thought he ended that person perfectly.
Oh
Um,
wow. I don't even remember the ending, but I don't know if I read Rabbit at Rest. So don't maybe well, maybe you should tell. What do you
yeah, no,
think?
no, no, no. It's no, you should read it. Well, because the last two won the Pulitzers, so that was kind of what
Right,
really.
right,
And what was awesome about that book series was he wrote it every 10 years, so you're reading Rabbit in real time. So
right,
when he wrote that final book, it had been 30 plus years since he wrote the first book. Um,
right.
I felt like he really just he lived that character and he made it happen. So that would be, or and also Jurassic Park.
Oh, it was a good ending to Jurassic Park.
Yeah, yeah, there's a good ending to Jurassic Park. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Gatsby is really a great ending.
totally.
I mean
Yeah,
that you can't really beat that ending.
yeah. Funny, I just had on Michael Ferris Smith, and he just put out a book a couple of years ago called
Oh
Nick.
yeah. Yeah.
And that was kind of a take off what he thought the Gatsby character life could have been like, you know.
Right.
So that was pretty interesting to hear his version of that. All right, so this fourth book, so the fifth book's out now.
Yes.
What is? Are you already working on the sixth book? Are you going to
Yes, I'm writing.
Sardinia?
I
Where are you
wrote that.
going?
I wrote that. So after I wrote the first draft
The
of
horror novel you were talking about? The
no, no,
horror.
I mean, after I wrote the first draft of Lost Americans, I finally the world opened up, and in 2021, I was in April 2021, I was able to go to Cairo. I took the first plane I could post, inoculation, and kind of walk the steps of the characters to make sure the city hadn't changed so drastically in 10 years. I was writing about a city that no longer existed. And, as it was the same city. I felt like there was obviously a lot that I put back in, like some great details that I wouldn't have had I not done that trip. But it was overall sort of it worked and it succeeded. And so that was the end of that book. And then yes, while waiting for this publication, I wrote the short horror novel set in Luxor. It's in a little hotel. Well, on that same trip, I took a boat down the Nile or up the Nile, and I went from Luxor to Aswan, and which is amazing. And swam in the Nile, which you don't have to worry about crocodiles because after the Aswan Dam, they don't come up. I think you have to worry about parasites. It's like instead of macro worries, it's micro worries. But I couldn't resist swimming in the Nile because, like, that's swimming in the Nile. So, but before the boat, I stayed in this amazing old Victorian hotel called the Winter Palace, which is where Agatha Christie wrote and where the announcement of Tutankhamun's grave, the discovery was announced in 1923. And it's this beautiful old hotel. And of course, like anything beautiful, I want to ruin instantly by envisioning a horror set there, So I wrote that. And then we're lucky, and last year I got a writing recidency in Paris for 7 months. Yeah, which was great. And I had originally thought I was going to come back home again and write a Cincinnati novel. And then this Paris thing happened. And I was like, okay, I'll just shift my idea. Instead of Cincinnati, it'll be Paris. So, which is not an easy transition, really, for
Cincinnati novel. I mean, I feel like there could be a novel about Ohio called Ohio. I feel like that's there.
You don't like a Cincinnati.
Oh, I just don't know if Jonathan Franzen has written it already, but
well, he didn't. I think he was more Illinois, but or Missouri, but
well, you should do it. I mean, Steinbeck did all of California. Right? Yeah, why not? Why make it happen?
I always wanted to write a memoir. I mean, I actually don't want to write a memoir, but if I ever wrote a memoir, I want to call it Cincinnati, it's just about my life, New York on. Cincinnati. But that's just the name of it.
Yeah, we got to end on that one. That was perfect, Chris. I appreciate that.
Right?
Cincinnati, that was perfect. Please let everyone know what's the name of the new book coming out and where can everyone get it and all that good stuff.
Lost Americans, and it is out next week. It's on March 14th, and you should find it at your local bookstore, I hope.
Awesome. And are you on Instagram or Twitter or any social media?
I'm on Instagram.
Great.
Christ Bollen. I wish I had picked a different name, but I didn't realize that it was going to stick. Instagram. I just did it one time at a dinner. Yeah. It was a joke, but and then so I'm on. I'm not much of a tweeter, I have to say. Are you
on Twitter? God no. No, I'm even with the Instagram for the pot. I can't do social media. I'm not good.
I can't either.
Yeah, I see someone post a photo of a carrot and it gets 8,000 likes. And I post a photo of like Walter Mosley and he gets 2 likes. So I
know. It's so dark. It's so disturbing.
Makes a difference.
You feel like you could write a novel or just like film your cat. You know what I
mean? We can share at Reba's. Everyone knows Reba on the podcast. She's sitting there patiently waiting for me.
Oh.
So that's my little bulldog, and that means it's probably me to go. Chris, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you.